There are so many of us committed to improving the lives of the youth in our communities. The In It for Youth podcast is a place for us to come together, from professionals who work with and serve youth to those that champion issues affecting children, to community advocates and stakeholders, and insightful young minds too. The In It for Youth podcast is a tapestry of voices united by a dedication to youth well-being and empowering the young generations of today and tomorrow. I'm your host, Jamie Gale, and I'm so glad you've joined me on this team that is in it for youth. Hello and welcome back to the show. Thank you all so much for your warm response to the beginning of season 2. It has been really great to hear such positive feedback from you about these conversations. And my one ask for you today is to share the show with someone you think would find it interesting. Maybe someone who is also committed to youth well-being. We really need to stick together. I guess I have two asks of you. If you have any recommendations of someone who you think would be a great guest for the podcast, someone who's doing heart-centered, important work in a youth-serving field, maybe that's you, maybe that's someone you know, please let me know. I would love to share their perspective and story with our listeners. Okay, my guest for today's episode focuses her work on one of the biggest contributors to youth well-being, if not the biggest contributor, and that's parents. I'm joined today by Jackie Cook, who is the founder of her company, Poppins, where she helps organizations create supportive work environments for expecting and new parents. With personal experience as a new working mom and a manager in both the U.S. and international settings, Jackie specializes in guiding businesses to enhance their parental leave policies and communication to attract and retain talented professionals. Jackie is also the co-founder of the 9 In, 9 Out Parent and Baby Expo, which raises awareness about community resources parents need for happy and healthy birth and postpartum experiences. Congratulations on all of your impact on youth well-being, Jackie, and welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Jamie. I'm glad to be here. Appreciate you having me on.
Let's start by first talking about Poppins. You're working to support new parents, especially when it comes to working parents, but you had been working in healthcare IT for 15 years, I think, and made the change to this work. Can you give us a look into how and why that career shift happened?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think it's something I would have predicted 10 years ago, making this shift, but I was working for a large healthcare IT company, and that work brought me over to the Netherlands in 2014 for a couple of years. I was helping with hospital implementations of medical records, which was a lot of fun. And it was a really great privilege to be able to do that in a different setting. And while I was there, my husband and I found out we were pregnant. And while it was a planned pregnancy, it happened with timing that we didn't exactly expect. So that the timing was not great for my job. I was honestly really worried about telling my boss that I was pregnant because the timing was terrible from a work standpoint. But I had a really excellent boss who said, "That's awesome. Congratulations," which was such a relief. Our pregnancy progressed. And while we were on our US benefits and my company's healthcare and that sort of thing, we were in the Dutch healthcare system. So we went through the Dutch midwife group, and we really experienced firsthand what healthcare in another country looks like. And what that looked like for having a baby was a very practical approach to pregnancy and childbirth, which was if you are healthy and your baby looks healthy, then you use a midwife. If you need more help, we refer you to OBs. If your delivery is progressing well and you want to have your baby at home, that's cool. We can do that. I did not want to do that. So we went to the hospital where my son was born. And about 2 hours later, they said, "Well, everything looks good with you. Everything looks good with your baby. There's really no reason for you to be in this hospital," and sent us home, which when I tell American friends and people on the street that I was home 2 hours after having my baby, usually the reaction is a bit of shock and, "Oh my goodness, what did you do?" But the system is set up to support that. So we did not go home alone. We went home with a service provider who's about the equivalent of a postpartum doula here in the US, who gave us a checklist of things to look out for, phone number to call if we were worried or had questions overnight. And she said, "I'll be back tomorrow at 8 a.m. And then she came to our apartment every day for a few hours a day for that first week and really made sure that we were well supported, that our questions were answered, that our baby was doing well. She did things like check that breastfeeding was going well in those first couple critical days. She made a sandwich for me for lunch and then said, now I'm going to hold your baby and you go take a nap. So these were some of the things that we experienced that we almost didn't know to appreciate. We sort of knew, I don't think this is how it is in the US, but it was our first time going through parenting. So we were just in survival mode like every other first time parent. And then fast forward a couple of years, we were back in the US and we had our daughter here in Madison, Wisconsin, where again, we had a really great experience with the medical system, which is not everyone's experience, but for us, our healthcare provider did a great job taking care of us. We felt really well supported through the childbirth process. And then 24 hours later, we were home with our new baby and our toddler. And while we had a lot more family support in the area and we had friends that were able to bring meals, we did not have that postpartum doula. It had not occurred to me to hire someone to do that, and no one suggested it. And pretty immediately, I was like, where is that person that is making my sandwich without me asking for it? Where is that person that is asking me how I'm doing and taking my temperature and just giving me that extra reassurance that I've got this? Even though I thought, gosh, I should have this. I've done this already, right? But even that second time around, it felt different. My baby, the second time was a different baby than my first baby. She latched on differently. She cried differently. She slept a little differently. So all that to say, we had these two very contrasting postpartum experiences between our two kids. And after that point in time, I really started tuning into what are other parents experiencing as they're going through their parental leave, their new baby phase, coming back to work with a new baby. I had many team members at my job at that time who were in the getting married and having their first baby phase. I had a lot of friends who were just in that phase of life. And I started hearing more and more stories that were really disturbing about health issues, mental health issues, physical health issues that were really challenging and that went on for longer than it seemed like they should have to, that maybe didn't get treated as early as they could. The example that sticks with me the most and that really spurred me to think something has to be done about this. We should be doing better. One of my very good friends from high school, who lives a couple hours away, had her third baby. Right after she had her baby, she said, gosh, this seems so much easier this third time around. Even breastfeeding is going better. And then I talked to her a couple months later and asked how it was going, and it wasn't going well. And in fact, what she had thought was going better was really not good. She, in those first couple weeks of having her third baby, was experiencing extreme pain while she was breastfeeding. So it got to the point where every time her baby cried, she would start to cry in anticipation of the pain that she was going to feel when her baby latched on. And after several days of everyone in the house crying, her husband finally said, this is not okay. We need to call someone. We need to get some help. And she had a lactation consultant who was able to come to her house, watch her breastfeed, look at her breasts. And my friend had thought that she maybe had a cracked nipple. She'd been seeing some blood. But in fact, what she thought was maybe a normal amount of pain and a cracked nipple ended up being an open wound. And the lactation consultant said, this is beyond what I can help with. You need to go to the doctor. And so my friend ended up going on antibiotics, going on an antifungal cream, having to go see a breast specialist for wound care. I thought, this shouldn't have gone this far. This is something that lactation consultant, if she'd been called in 3 days earlier, could have set the stage and made a couple tweaks, really solved the problem before it became a crisis. And I think we hear that in so many ways. We hear that in the mental health space, where we know 1 out of 5 new moms struggle with a mental health challenge, and many don't get treatment. We know that 60% of moms in the US don't meet their own breastfeeding goals because they don't have the system support around them. Those stories and those stats just kept piling on top of me. And I I kept thinking back to my first baby and thinking, well, the Dutch have figured this out. It can be better. And we have people in the US who provide those types of services. They're just maybe not part of the mainstream or part of the common path that expecting parents know to line up.
Yeah, it's so true. So I have 3 kids. One is 18. I can't believe that. One is almost 17 and one is 14. And just even the shift in awareness of these services that they even exist has been, I mean, over the past 18 years, it has increased so much. But there is still, you know, I have friends who are having their first baby right now, and there is still this gap and this feeling of like, I don't really need the help, so I'm not going to ask for it. Or, you know, that they're not even sure where to go for this. So it's really, really great that you heard this problem. And this is how so many of the, you know, we have a listenership of youth serving professionals. So many of them have started businesses. And so many of us started our businesses because we saw a need, we saw a problem, and we decided that we had the skills and the wherewithal to start to try to contribute to the solution for it. So you saw all of these things going on. So then how did you transition into deciding that you were going to make the shift to helping women navigate this?
Yeah. Thanks for bringing me back to the main question here. So I think a big push was actually the COVID pandemic. During 2020, we were going through, like many families and working parents, trying to figure out how to balance a dual career household with unreliable childcare. And due to a variety of factors, some because of the pandemic, some because of changes that had been happening at the company I was at that time, I really decided it was just time to make a change. So I left my corporate career. And at that point, I sort of was noodling on this. I want to do something in this realm of postpartum support, but I didn't know what that might look like or what that might mean. So in 2021, my family took a 10-month break from reality. We sold our house. We moved into an RV. We traveled around the country for about 9 months. Our kids, we were in some ways lucky because our kids were not babies, but also not yet in school. So we didn't have some of the pressures that a lot of working parents had during that time of trying to manage online school while we were also doing our jobs. So we just said, our kids are not in school yet. We're gonna kind of like pull out for a year.
Yeah.
So that really gave me a career and a mental break for about 6 to 8 months, where I was a full-time mom. That was a good experience for me to realize that is not my calling. And I have a lot of respect for the parents out there that make full-time parenting work. So when we moved back to Madison, I started Poppins with the goal of raising awareness and connecting expecting parents with the resources that they might need so that they would know how to access them, when to access them, hopefully sooner than they might otherwise, to avoid a crisis situation, but also to give families an opportunity to thrive from the very beginning of welcoming a baby. And just sort of through the evolution of the first several months of working with clients, I started exploring more of what it could look like to help parents plan for maternity leave, parental leave. That was an area where I felt really well equipped to help people because I had helped a number of team members do it. My background in project management is very helpful in that realm of just saying, okay, you're going to have 3 months off work. What are all the things that need to happen for you to do that well? Both so that you don't have to take calls from the delivery room, which no one wants, and also so that your business knows exactly who's going to do what while you're out, so that they don't feel like they need to call you because you've set things up really well for them. And hopefully then when you go back to work, you're not coming back to a mess that you have to clean up.
That's great. Okay. So that's a perfect transition. You sort of alluded to that you are supporting these families through this transition, but I guess could you kind of give us the zoomed out view of like, what are the buckets of ways that Poppins helps families make this transition? You know, like what are the services? I saw on your website that you have a bunch of different things. So can you kind of just fill us in on like, what are the different categories of services that Poppins provides?
Yeah, I think probably the easiest way to break it down is at an individual level, we focus on 3 phases: preparing for your parental leave, having a well-supported parental leave, and then easing the transition back to work. And we look at that through the lens of how can you do that well, both at work and at home? So as you are preparing for your parental leave, most of that is going to be at work kind of stuff, like who's going to do the stuff that you normally do while you're not there. But there's also an at-home aspect. So there's a lot of overwhelm that happens for especially first-time parents around, what do I need for my nursery? What do I pack in my hospital bag? Do I really need all these things? What do I put on my baby registry? What is this nose snot sucker thing? And am I really going to have to use that? It looks gross. So there are all these additional things. There's additional medical appointments that you're going to while you're still trying to do your normal day-to-day job. So that's kind of in the prep for leave. We're helping guide expecting parents through that process, kind of coaching what to do and when, as well as some tactical helping on things like the baby registry side of things. So one of the services we offer is a baby registry consult. If you want to just outsource some of that, we'll go through, with you about your parenting goals and build up a baby registry for you so that you can have a little more confidence that you're going to have what you need and not a whole bunch of extra stuff that you have to return later. If that is a weight on your shoulder, that's an area we can help.
Cool.
And then that second phase, then being really ready for your maternity leave, that's where we are doing things like lining up the services, building that awareness of who's in your community that can help with various things. So if you have a goal to breastfeed, we're going to help connect you with the lactation consultants in your community. That might be through your health system. That might be someone independent. It might be having one of each in your back pocket, so that if things are going great and you're feeling good, you don't necessarily have to call that person. But if on day 2, you are just not sure how it's going, or if you know it's not going well, but you don't know how to fix it because it's something you've never done before and you're not an expert in that area, you don't have to frantically be Googling and making calls while you're crying on your couch. You have that person ready to go. So that's our goal there, is really to set families up with the experts in their community that they can call on. And we also provide some education for family and friends who want to help out. So we have an online course called Grandma Camp, where if you have a mother, a mother-in-law, or a cousin who is going to come and stay with you for a couple of weeks and really help out with that baby, we help align expectations for what does that look like, and also bring them up to speed on current baby care guidelines. So as you mentioned, Jamie, a lot changes over the course of a few years. Things like, should the baby sleep on their belly or their back? That's something that's changed in the last 20 to 30 years. Right. So we do kind of a refresher of here's where things stand now so that the new parent doesn't have to do.
That's huge. That's really huge. Yeah, it's interesting because this conversation is bringing me back to those early days, which, right now I'm preparing to launch a kid into her college years. So it feels like a million years ago. But then when I think about it, I just can remember some of those raw emotions from that early transition. And I remember just first in the early days, I took her for one of her early checkups, and I think it was her 4-day check. And they suggested that I go see a lactation consultant because she wasn't gaining weight. And it was just that feeling that I had failed. And I now, of course, outside of that, don't see that as a failure at all. I did exactly what she needed. I took her to get the services she needed. We've supplemented with formula for a couple of days, which helped get back into I don't even know if that's a recommendation anymore, but at the time it was, and it got us back into full-time breastfeeding, and that was great. But then there was also this sense that I had a ton of experience with babies and kids. I had been a teacher. I had been a nanny. I had a ton of experience with kids and infants and newborns. And it was like the thing I loved to do. But I felt like I woke up in that first, few weeks to like, oh my God, this is what all these parents have been going through. It's until you do it, you really just don't know, no matter how much experience you have with babies or with children. It's such a huge transition. So I think that it's really beautiful that you're supporting these families as they go through this. I felt like I was like seeing an underworld of like what all these women had been through before. And so any amount of transparency that you can add to the picture for these families, for these new parents, especially the new moms, I think is really, really wonderful.
Well, I think what you just said is so important, Jamie, too, of like, you did all the right things and there's still that moment where you feel like a failure. And now you recognize that's not true. You did great. You did what you needed to do. The reality is like parenting is a struggle.
Totally.
Right? my kids are 7 and 9 now.
Mm.
The struggle is different than it
Totally.
was in those really raw early days where the highs are so high and the
Mhm.
lows are so
Mhm.
low. And so the work I'm doing with Poppins, it's not going to eliminate that struggle. But I think the more awareness we can bring to you're not alone in that. These are common things. Some of these things, there is help available that you should take, and that you're not a bad parent for taking the help. I think too many of us suffer in isolation for too long.
Yeah.
And so the more we can collectively try to cut that down, I think the better for our communities and our kids.
And our kids. And that was kind of going to be what I asked you to, get on your soapbox about for a moment. This is a podcast about youth well-being, and we are spending this conversation mostly talking about parents, but clearly there's a direct correlation between parental well-being and youth well-being. And so if you want to give a little pitch for why this is so important for kids, for babies, and then as they go into their childhood, for parents to be so well supported.
Yeah, I think healthy parents, healthy kids is maybe a little trite and oversimplified, but the challenges that a lot of new parents, and especially new moms, but not just new moms, new parents face when unaddressed, they can continue for years. We see this especially in the mental health statistics. 1 in 5 new moms struggle with a perinatal mental health challenge. 75% of those don't get treatment. Some of these early challenges don't just disappear and go away as your kids get older. And so by setting a good foundation early, I think that helps in your parenting and in the health of your whole family ongoing. I would also say on a personal note, I'm someone who has never been great at asking for help. And it is a constant, even now that I encourage everyone else to get as much help as possible, it's still something that's hard for me. But I think by doing that work, by doing that practice, by asking for a community, I think that is good modeling for our kids, that they don't have to do it all alone. And I hope that that's what my kids are learning, that they are part of a community that can lean on each other, that sometimes they're the helpers and sometimes they're the people that need help. And that's okay.
They learn by watching us. And, when we want them to do as we say and not as we do, it never works. Right. And so when we model it, even if they don't acknowledge it, they are seeing and they are learning. And that is so huge. I mean, even now, my almost 17-year-old son climbed under my lap. He's taller than me and bigger than me. And he was like, "What are you upset about, Mom?" And he could just feel and I was like, "Yeah, I guess you're right. I am a little bit stressed about this or that." And I kind of just talked it out and I was like, "Thanks." So they feel it even if we don't say it. And so I could not agree more. And I think the work you're doing is so important. I'm also really particularly interested in how you're directly supporting employers and workplaces. I think this is a really unique aspect of your business. And, I've heard the phrase many times over my parenting journey, as I'm sure you have, that like parents, especially women, are supposed to, work like we don't have kids and parent like we don't have a job. And this is just, a pressure that is impossible to meet. I love that you're also supporting employers and workplaces. And it can feel like, until it's in your lap, it can feel like I don't really know how to do this, both as an employer and as an employee. Can you tell us how you're working to support these workplaces and employers directly?
Yeah. What I was finding with my first handful of clients was in that preparation for parental leave, I had a set of questions that I said, you should go make sure you understand how this works with your job. And it was maybe 15 questions. So things like, how much time do you get off? Is it paid? What paperwork do you have to fill out? And it occurred to me that if you have 3 people that work for the same company and they're all asking those questions, maybe it should be easier to find the answer. And that could be something that the employer provides more proactively in a nice, warm, supported communication so that the expecting parent doesn't have to dig through lots of different documents or go to their manager and then to HR and then to benefits to get all that information. When again, they're still doing their normal job. And then they have all these new medical appointments that they're going to. So there's a lot of other stuff they're doing. And so what I do with employers is say, okay, here are all the things, and all the things keeps evolving and being added to. But here are many of the things that your expecting and new parents may want to know, may be wondering about, may be trying to find information on. Let's put that together in an easy to consume human language. It gives that then employee a good sense of what their benefits are and how they can use them. And it can actually, I think, help the employer highlight what they're already offering that the new parent might not be connecting as a benefit. So, for example, a lot of employers offer an HSA or a healthcare FSA. And a lot of employees take advantage of it. But if you are a healthy 26-year-old, you might not be putting a lot of money into that because it's more of a pain to use than it's worth to enroll in. I remember thinking that anyway in my 20s, like, why would I bother with this? It's extra paperwork. And then I have to fill out a form at the end of the year. But once you add that baby in, there's a lot of stuff you can use that money for and get more out of your money. So there's a financial benefit to using that for things like mental health or lactation copays. So any healthcare services that are not directly covered by insurance, you can use that HSA money. You can use it for infant Tylenol at Walgreens. You can use it for a baby first aid kit. So once you add all these sort of kid expenses into your life, suddenly maybe that HSA money becomes a lot more appealing. And it's something that your employer already offers. So if your employer can say up front, oh, congratulations, here's the info you want to know about your time off, et cetera, et cetera. And also, just a reminder, you have access to fund this HSA, for example. And here are some of the ways that you can use it in this phase of life that would possibly be helpful for you. So that's an example of how I work with employers, looking at what do they offer already? How can that be applied to expecting a new parent? And then how can they communicate that really proactively so that hopefully their employee feels like there's a nice, snug, warm blanket swaddling them up as they're going through this life process.
So from just a practical question, do you work with these companies kind of as a one-on-one consultant with them? Is this something that they reach out and do directly with you, or is it more like an online course thing?
Yeah, great question. It's direct consulting with the employer. Okay. And so there's a couple service packages that we can set up or do hourly work. But yeah, work directly with the employer. And that way the experience is really tailored to what they offer and the size they are. I've also had employers cover the cost of the one-on-one support for their employees.
Oh.
So, for example, if you're a smaller company, it might not be worth having a big document that goes through all of your benefits for a new and expecting parent, right? Because you maybe have one a year or less going out on leave. But for those companies, having someone else like me provide that guided one-on-one support experience, that's then a way for their employee to feel really well supported by the company without the company having to do a ton of extra work or to reevaluate their entire benefits package necessarily.
Okay, that's kind of what I was wondering. That's really interesting. And let's say a small business that doesn't have a huge HR department, they don't, like you said, maybe they only have in a 10-year period, they only have one employee or one staff member that goes on maternity leave. So it suddenly is like oh gosh, how do not
a fire drill,
right? It's like not for lack of wanting to support the staff member, but maybe they just haven't had to do it yet. And us in business ownership, we're just figuring it all out as we go.
Exactly, just in time work.
Yeah, exactly. And so, what would you want a small business owner or a company to know when they are experiencing their first staff member that they do want to support? Well, it has to fit still in the company's budget. Maybe they aren't a company that is required by FMLA to cover these things, but they still do want to support their staff member really well. I guess, what would you want that company to know? If you could give like one little wish list item for companies to know that they can make a difference without, needing to create a whole new subdivision of their business.
Yeah. I think as a specific example, here in Wisconsin, there's no paid family leave requirement at the state level. We don't have that at the federal level either. FMLA does not cover all employers, as you mentioned. So there are a lot of small businesses that don't have any requirement to provide any paid time off or job protected time off for their employees. But in the case where they have someone who is maybe the first person having a baby at their company ever, and it's someone that they want to keep and they want that person to feel good about the experience, I think the first thing I'd say is say congratulations. And I'm so happy for you. And then be upfront that we're going to work through this and figure out how to support you in what you need. And that doesn't mean that you have to pay out their salary for the time that you're going to give. But it does mean that you're going to then put some time into answering those questions. And that's certainly something that from a Poppin standpoint, I can help with and would be happy to work with that employer or that individual to say, okay, here are some of the questions that it doesn't matter whether the answer is yes or no. It matters that you have an answer and that you figure out the answer so that it's clear. Because I think most people, especially people who work at small companies or growing companies or startups, they know that some of the business is making it up as you go along and you're along for the ride and you can be part of that. In those cases, a lot of times what people are looking for is clarity so that they can plan around it.
Totally. I think that's great. So you're also the co-founder of a series of events that support parents in the postpartum time period. And here in Madison, Wisconsin, we have one of those events coming up shortly. And so I'd love for you to tell us about why you created 9 In, 9 Out and what role that serves in our community and in the other cities that you're starting the program in.
Yeah. So a partner who's a sleep consultant in town and I started the 9 In, 9 Out Parent and Baby Expo because we were tired of hearing our friends and neighbors and people we ran into at the store say, I wish I'd known about that 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 2 years ago. And I said that to Natalie, who is my partner for the events, when I found out she was a certified sleep consultant. My daughter at the time was, I think, 4 and was sleeping like a champ at that time, but had not been 3 years earlier. And I thought, gosh, I had no idea there were sleep consultants out there. Through my work with Poppins, there's a level of I can advise and guide you on who you might need and what services you might want to take advantage of. 9 In, 9 Out events take that a step further and bring all of those local providers and services together in a room so that you, as someone who's maybe planning to grow your family in the next year, actively expecting a baby, or has just had a new baby, you can go and meet some of these people and get a feel for that yourself. Because if I'm just telling you, oh, you might want to consider a physical therapist for pelvic floor therapy after you have a baby, that sounds great. But if you've never had a baby before, it might also sound like, okay, well, yeah, right. I'll deal with that later. Right. Versus if you are able to go and meet with 2 or 3 pelvic floor specialists, that helps you learn about why they're doing what they're doing. What are some of the signs and symptoms that might indicate it'd be helpful to use them? And also whether you like that person or not, because not everyone is everyone else's cup of tea. So 9 In, 9 Out gives that opportunity for parents to raise awareness about what's out there and also to see who might be a good fit for them and for their family.
That's really neat. So much of this transition into parenting and in parenting is such a personal experience. Whereas like, your wedding planning, yeah, you want to go see what the options are, but that the end result is like a pretty event. You don't have to love every provider that you work with for your wedding. The baby years, the baby phase is so personal. So I love that point about getting to personally meet them. That's really neat. And you also offer an opportunity for professionals to connect at your events as well. And so you want to kind of fill us in on what that looks like too?
Yeah, that's been one of the more fun aspects as an organizer, sort of maybe unanticipated fun aspects. We're, of course, really excited about bringing new and expecting parents in the door to meet all these great resources. This will be our 3rd year in Madison. And the first year that we ran the event was 2023. So, a couple of years beyond COVID, but I think there was still a little bit of in-person events had not really been happening all that much for a couple of years. And so our first event, we decided, well, we'll do kind of a coffee hour before we open up the expo. We found that there was so much enthusiasm for that because these were providers that maybe knew about each other from social media or from driving around town and seeing their office sign, or from, in some cases, referring patients and clients to each other, but that had never met in person. So we heard multiple times someone say, oh my gosh, I've referred clients to you and I hear you're so awesome. And now I can finally meet you and put a face to the name. And so it's a really nice opportunity for businesses to just build up some collaboration. We've seen some of our exhibitors go on to do workshops with each other, bring people on their podcasts, or enhance their referral networks, which I think is really exciting for our community, because if I go to my chiropractor and I'm complaining about something else and they say, oh, who's really great is this other group, that's going to give me a built-in trust factor and maybe make it more likely that I'm going to take advantage of that recommendation, which is good for my personal health. And it's good for, I think, our local economy as well.
Absolutely. I love that. Kudos to you for creating so many ways that you're supporting the families in our community, the businesses in our community, at the end of the day, the youth in our community through your work with parents that are about to be parents and new parents and employers supporting these parents. And so just kudos to you and thank you for all of the work that you're doing. I have one last question that I ask all of my guests, and that if you could wave a magic wand on behalf of kids in 2025, what would you wish for them and what messages would you tell them? And if you're talking to babies, then you don't have to put messages that you would tell them, but what would you wish for kids or babies in 2025?
Oh, what a great question. There's so many things. If I could wave a magic wand for babies in 2025, I would wish that their parents have access to use and afford the support that they need to be the kind of parents they want to be. And secondly, maybe I would wish that these babies keep giving their parents hugs through their 18-year-old years and beyond, that there's lots of snuggles going on back and forth.
Oh, yeah, it's, I will totally second both of those ends of the parenting spectrum, from the babies to the teens still hugging and snuggling their parents. I will say that it still happens. It still happens. Like I said, my almost 17-year-old, climbed up into my lap the other day, and the teen years are the candy of parenting so far. It happens. So I will wave my magic wand right along with you for both of those wishes.
Oh, you've just given me hope for the future, Jamie. Thank you.
Okay, good. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Jackie, and for being in it for youth. Can you please tell listeners where they can find out about Poppins, where they can find out about the Night In, Night Out Expo, and kind of just where to reach out to you if they want to have a further conversation with you? Yeah,
absolutely. For Poppins, you can learn more and reach out to me through my website, which is poppinsfam.com, POPINSFAM. And for our Parent and Baby Expo coming to Madison April 13th, our website is the number 9in9out.com.
Okay, great. Well, we will link all of that in the show notes. Thank you again for joining me. It was wonderful to talk with you. I hope that we continue to work together and get to know each other and support each other's work as the years go on. So thanks for being in it for youth, and to all the listeners, thank you so much for listening. We'll be back next time with another inspiring interview. In It for Youth is a Lit Path Studios production. Music is by Inspiring Audio and Pond 5. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And to learn more about this show and all other shows on the network, visit www.litpathstudios.com.